Hi, and welcome to Video 101. I'm John Crossman, and this segment continues talking about our list of artistic characteristics of an effective video editor. This list was generated by me a few months ago, and it was posted in an answer I gave and got some good feedback, so I'm sharing this with you now. All of these pieces, all of these answers are my opinion. I have a long time doing this and have thought probably way too much about it, but that's just me, and so I share this list with you, and hopefully it will be of help. The first characteristic, of course, was know your footage. The second one was know your audience. And in this video, we're going to talk about knowing the basic rules of editing and why you should know them, where they came from, and the fact that once you know them, then of course you can break them. So the first thing to understand is that, editing video is part of a communications message that you're creating. And in effective communication, there's some, basic guidelines that make communication work. And it doesn't matter if you're talking about social media or you're talking about talking to your parents or and so one is to have the clear message, one is to understand your audience, one is to be able to listen and understand. A very common thing that you would learn in a communications class is the art of active listening. What that means is that as I say this, if you want to understand what I said and want me to know that you understood what I said, you might reply to, so what you said is this. And you might put it in your own words, but, the meaning should be the same. Well, editing rules are the same kind of thing. They were designed from the first days of editing to help make a message clear and understandable to the viewer. As the editor, you will know things that the viewer doesn't know, and so your job is to make sure that they know what they need to know to be able to understand the content of the video. So I'm going to do an insert here because I started to talk about editing rules, but I didn't really talk about very many, and rather than do another video on editing rules, I would just go simply through 5 of them really quickly here. The thing to remember about these rules are I don't know if anybody follows them anymore. I think they do. If you watch movies, if you watch documentaries, if you watch drama, the conventions and the rules are still generally followed. But from what I can tell, when I first started editing, all I could do was cut. When movies were first made, all you could do was cut. And so some of these rules, like the first one, which is cutting on movement, actually derive from the ability that, or the limitation that we had in editing way back, that we only were able to cut between shots. So real quick, I'll run through the 5. The first one is cutting on motion. The second one is cutting out after movement has started or just before the camera settles. Number 3 is lip flap. Number 4 is wide, medium, and tight. And number 5 is the 180-degree rule, which I'll go through these as quick as I can. So when I was taught editing, I was taught not to cut in and out of movement. So what happens then if you have today, I use movement all the time, and I come in and out of movement all the time, and really the problem solver is called a dissolve or a fade. You can fade into movement, you can fade out of movement. Now, in other videos on this, we talk about, some editing techniques, and a dissolve has traditionally been used to give you the idea of the passage of time, but it can also just be used to smooth out your transitions. Some people use jump cuts all the time. I learned my craft in news, and so jump cut was considered an error. So they would cut away, to the reporter nodding, and as silly as even we thought those were, at least that didn't at least you didn't see the jump cut, and that's what they were designed to do. So today people do jump cuts all the time. I mean, I've seen YouTube videos where they've literally edit in between each word, either because the person can't formulate a sentence on their own, which is usually the reason, I would think, or for some reason the reason you don't do jump cuts is because it is distracting, just like all these other rules. So I was talking about cutting in and out of movement. The way that if you're limited to cuts, the way that I would traditionally get around it is I would cut into movement, and then I would let the shot settle, and then before I made the next cut. And of all the possibilities, that was the least jarring. Psychologically, I think the reason is because if you cut in and out of movement, you're not seeing the whole shot. Whereas if you're on a static, your eye sees the person, they see the background, they hear it talking. It's the whole package. If it's a wide shot, they see the city, they hear the traffic, they see that it's sunrise or sunset or whatever. They see the whole picture, they get the information like that. But on a movement, as soon as you cut to it and it's moving, you have just a moment where you're wondering, well, what did I miss? And then if you cut out, you have a moment of wondering, well, where did the shot go? I don't know where it came from, and I don't know where it goes. And the idea behind editing is really to make sure that you're communicating clearly and effectively. And you don't want the viewer to be sitting there going, well, where did that shot go, or how did that shot end, or, I mean, it's a distraction from whatever message you're trying to convey. And just like any of these rules, there are times that you can break it for the effect that it gives. But if you're really trying to deliver a clear, concise message, dissolve in and out of movements. Don't cut in and out of movements. The second one, which I've noticed when I've worked with editors recently, is that they don't see that they're on a shot, and just as the camera moves, they cut. And I'll go back and say, well, that's distracting because, it's literally doing this, right? I mean, the camera's moving and then you cut away. The same thing is it comes in, on a cut. It's distracting to the eye, and for the reasons I've already outlined, that's not what we're trying to do. When I would show this to younger or new editors, they wouldn't even see it. I'd go, we'd go through it frame by frame, and I go, see, that's starting to move, and now you cut. It has to be one frame back. And, you fix it, and you can see there's a difference. All of a sudden, it's just, the edit basically disappears, whereas before, it really called attention to itself because you were cutting either before the camera was settled on their shot, or you were cutting as the camera started to move away from their shot. And I'm not talking about a camera, starting to zoom, and, I'm talking about somebody hitting, record or stop on their camera, and you're getting that jiggle in the camera. Obviously you don't want that because it's distracting. The next one is lip flap, which means that sometimes you're dealt with interview segments, what I call a soundbite, that's very tight. There's some people that just never take a breath and they keep talking all the time, and you gotta, you want the producer wants you to stop after the last word I said, time. And so you might be able to, audio-wise, actually cut that cleanly, but my lips just never stop moving. And so if you see someone's lips move, but the interview is done, so they go, and we're going to the park, and you don't hear the and, but you see the person start to talk, that's called lip flap. And that was one of the first things that a reporter taught me at the station that I worked at, is that, that's considered poor editing because, again, it's a distraction from the story. The person is obviously going to say something else, but the viewer doesn't get to hear it, and so they go, well, I wonder what else they were going to say. And in that second, they lose, that much time or equal or more in what they're supposed to be paying attention to in the story. So all of these rules are around what gives you the smoothest, most professional presentation. So that's lip flap. The next one is, I would say, more of an editing convention, which what's the difference between a rule and convention? I don't know. But one of my all-time favorite shows ever is the series The West Wing. If you want an example of outstanding writing, outstanding acting, outstanding technical production, it's one of the best all-around shows I've ever seen. When you come back from commercial, you either see the White House, or you see Congress, or you see a wide shot of a hearing room, or the Supreme Court, or whatever it is, and then you go to a medium shot. And that might be, if you're familiar with the characters, that might be, you start with a shot of the White House, and then you go to a wide shot of the Oval Office, which isn't a huge room, but, so that's kind of a closer shot. And then as they may say a few words, and then it cuts to the president sitting behind the desk, or the president of the chair, or the president getting up to shake their hand or whatever. And so an editing convention is you start wide, medium, and then you can go to tight shots from there. You will never see the West Wing start a segment on a tight shot, of somebody's face, or a tight shot of, their handwriting or anything like that, because think of what the viewer is watching. You come back from a commercial, you go, oh, we're at the White House. Oh, we're in the Oval Office. Oh, now I'm ready to hear whoever's going to speak. It's not a long thing, but it's, in a way it's subliminal, but it really isn't. It's helping the viewer understand where they are and be ready to continue listening to the story. In the same respect, not necessarily from commercial, maybe that scene from the White House is over and they're going to transition to C.J. Craig giving a press conference. Well, the first shot is not going to be a tight shot of her at the podium. It's going to be the widest shot they can get of the press room. A lot of times, not all the time, but a regular shot would be her opening the door from the hallway to go into the press room. So that's kind of a medium shot. They will almost always cut to a wide shot from the back as she is up at the podium, and as she takes questions, well, now they're editing between mediums and close-ups between her and the reporters and, the room. And so that's a very logical convention that's used by editors every day. And sometimes if you're editing something and people seem confused about where they are or what's going on, revisit the idea of you establish where they are, maybe you go into a medium shot to set up the scene, and then you're ready to start telling the story. And it works no matter what kinds of, video that you're editing. At the wedding, you'd want to see the church. If you start out with the priest or the minister, a tight shot of them reading the words in a book, well, nobody knows what you're doing. So it's a very simple thing, but it's something that is done deliberately to help the viewer understand. The next one, or the last one I'm going to talk about in this insert, is the 180-degree rule. And the 180-degree rule, as you can see in this graphic, if you've got two people in a scene, there is an invisible line that splits the scene. And you can shoot that scene from either side of the line, but once you've chosen the side, you need to stay on that side because of the relationships. So you've got an actor talking this way to an actor talking this way, right? So if you're on this actor, they're facing that way, and when you turn the camera, now this actor is facing that way. So they're crossing each other, right? And you can cut back and forth between them, and it makes logical visual sense. If you're shooting this person as a tight shot, and then you cut to the second person, and they're at the same angle, your eyes go, well, who are they looking at? Because one of them's looking this way, the other one's got to be looking that way. And I mean, something if you want to play with, you can play with, but it's very disconcerting to the eye to break that 180-degree rule. Now, there are times when shooters will break it. So if you've got this and the camera pans around and now you're on the other side of the 180-degree line, well, then you've got to cut with that relationship intact. You can't jump back and forth. You need some kind of wide shot to be able to break that invisible line. You know, if you have a camera, try it out. You'll just see it's weird. I mean, it just does not work to do it that way. It's pretty rare. I have seen it very rarely, and it obviously was not done properly. And it's not good. It just doesn't look good. And you know, whether something looks good or doesn't look good, I mean, you know, it can be your own opinion. But I'm just saying, if for the general public, they're used to having that 180-degree rule, and if you break it, don't plan on people being able to follow it, because their eyes are going to be going, now what just happened? Something's off here. And whatever the person is saying is going to be way in the back of the person's attention. So this is a quick insert about 5 basic rules of editing. There's books available. I'm sure there's, you know, maybe I'll eventually do an extended video about the rules of editing, but all you have to do is look around and you can see, you know, say 3 camps. In television drama, network shows, people aren't going to break any of those rules that I just talked about. There is a beautiful montage during the last season of The West Wing, where Jimmy Smits is running for president, and there's a montage near the beginning of one of the shows of just to a piece of music. And it's a great editing job, and that may break some rules, I don't know. It's a mixture of video and stills, and it's a lovely edited thing. If you have Netflix, you can watch it. I think it's called Welcome to Wherever You Are is the name of the show. I've seen it way too many times, but excellent editing in that show. Whereas if you go to, you know, if you go and watch certain YouTube people that are very successful on YouTube, they're jump cutting all over the place, and you know, they don't actually break the 180-degree rule because they're not talking to anybody usually. But that's, you know, a differentiator between, you know, professional and amateur, is using these basic rules of editing. And again, you know, they work to smooth out the image to help the viewer understand what is going on visually. And if you are editing something and you want to confuse the viewer, then you break those rules. And there are montages and opens and things that I've done from time to time that'll break all those rules, but they do it for a reason. They do it because at that time I want to sow either confusion or excitement, or, you know, whatever it is I'm trying to do. If I can do it through breaking those rules, what I think will be effective, then, you know, of course I'll do that. So that's the insert about the rules, and now back to the regularly scheduled John. So the rules all have a reason, and there can be reasons to break the rules, but it's important to find those out, to use them to your advantage, both using them correctly and breaking them. You're watching Video 101. In our next video in this library, we'll talk about the 4th thing, which is motivation behind everything that you do as an editor, whether it's effects, whether it's graphics, whether it's, you know, just simple editing. Knowing what the motivation is a key characteristic of an effective video editor. My name is John Crossman, and thanks for watching.